all right?
Joseph Hussey is thrown from his cart as his horses become unmanageable. A puttering new automobile rumbled past his team of horses. The frightened horse bucked wildly, launching Hussey from his cart and throwing him to the ground. He stands up bruised and battered as he tries to calm the frightened horse. His cart lies upturned and severely damaged. This would be the first mention of an automobile in the newspaper. And for the next 2 decades or so, Nantucketers would fight to keep them off the streets of this island.
Welcome to the Nantucket Gam, a podcast from the Nantucket Historical Association. I'm Adam DeLogue.
And I'm Thomas Parrish.
And this month, we're going to be talking about the car ban on Nantucket. So, Thomas, I've heard a lot of people talking this summer that we've got too many cars on the island. But I never knew before starting to work at the Historical Association that there was a car ban. Tell us a little bit about it.
Starting in the early 1900s up until about the end of World War I, cars were actually banned on this island, which is something people may still want today when it's the middle of summer and you can't find parking.
There's times in the summer where if you're on Old South Road, you're going to be there for the next 45 minutes at least.
Yeah, I mean, I would like to ride my bike. And I think that if everyone rode the bike, there would be a lot less traffic on the road.
It's just not possible. That being said, once upon a time, it sounds like many people agreed with you.
Yeah, I mean, so let's take it back to the beginning of the 1900s, the turn of the century. In terms of transportation, probably one of the most fascinating points of history. Even here on Nantucket, as we end the 1800s, you have a railroad that goes from town off to Surfside and eventually out to Sconset.
Love the railroad, yeah.
You had the bicycle fad that we talked about in one of our last episodes.
Less interesting, but cool.
And then as we enter the 20th century, you have the new automobile, right, which is super exciting for a lot of people, but also threatens to really change the way of life out here and the speed of life out here.
And when is the first automobile introduced to Nantucket? What year are we talking about?
I don't know when the very first automobile arrived, but I do know there is one as early as 1900. The story we opened our episode with that accident between the car and the horses. That's the first documented instance of an automobile on Nantucket that I've seen, and that's in August 1900.
It's interesting. The very first mention is of, I mean, not a crash, but it sounds like certainly not a positive experience with the brand new automobile.
Well, it seemed to be fateful because from that moment, it was the popular opinion of many people on this island to try to keep them away from Nantucket as much as possible.
This was the issue of the day.
Very much so. Very, very much. It was the hot topic. I'm sort of surprised that I couldn't find an earlier article. I would have thought that the very first one would be written about, like the bicycle. We know when the first bicycle arrived because it was big news. And maybe I just missed it, but I didn't see an article that talked about the arrival of this first automobile.
Well, we know that you're a little bit more interested in the bicycles anyways.
A little bit of bias, perhaps.
Maybe. So this is the turn of the century, and I guess this is kind of like the heyday, or the Wild West, I should say, of automobiles, right?
It's definitely the beginning. It's a very new technology. The first law that Massachusetts passed in regard to the automobile is actually in 1902. It defines cars, or at least defines automobiles, I should say. And it says anything not powered by muscle or run upon a railroad or track, and it sets speed limits. It says that outside of towns, the maximum speed limit in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, you can go is 15 miles per hour, and in towns, it's 10 miles per hour.
That's a really broad definition as well. I mean, anything not powered by muscle or on a rail or track.
I kind of like it, though. I think it's pretty accurate. Because even e-bikes now would be considered in that definition an automobile.
It certainly is a broad definition.
But it's a new technology, right? This is not something that's been legally defined before.
I guess if you put 4 wheels on a boat, a sailboat, and caught some wind on Main Street, by this definition, it would be an automobile.
I guess technically, even at sea, it would still be an automobile by this definition.
So they're still trying to figure it out, it looks like, in 1902.
There's a petition that goes around, and as we saw in 1900 with Joseph Hussey, this petition is signed saying that automobiles are dangerous, and they actually lower the speed limit even more. So on Nantucket, you could go 4 miles per hour in town and only 8 miles per hour out of town. I think it also just comes down to this feeling of unknown speed, right? That the bicycle and the automobile, it unlocks the ability to go a lot faster. And brakes are not what they are now, so you'd be going much faster and not stopping as quickly. That people will, I think, rightfully nervous to all of a sudden have people going so much faster around you. I think it would be unnerving if all of a sudden everything just started going 10 times faster. And there was a very genuine concern for the safety, especially of children. Right? How much are we drilled as kids to look both ways before crossing the street, of wearing your seatbelt, of not running in the road? Right? This is part of all culture that we grow up with. All of this would have had to be relearned, not just by kids, but by adults also. And so I think there is a rightful concern to not want to just fully embrace it with no rules, because the danger is very real, as Joseph Hussey saw.
So they signed this petition and dropped the speed limit. And what's the goal really of this new movement, this group of folks who are worried about these newfangled automobiles and the speed at which they are traveling around the island?
Well, they're trying to understand what the cars will do to the island. There's also the business factor of people who give rides, right? These cars are going to put all of them out of business.
They're not a big fan of Uber.
Definitely not Uber. And so even in that petition to lower the speed limits, there's a small bit that even ponders the idea to ban automobiles outright completely. It's as early as 1903. This is 5 years before the Model T's even on the market.
How popular is this move on Nantucket? Is this most of the community is for a ban, or are there folks who are against the ban, who are pro car? What does this look like in terms of local politics?
Oh, it is. It is a hot topic.
Oh, so turf fields?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
PFAS, short-term rentals, yeah. No, but it really is hotly debated because the majority of people support the ban. There are other people who see that the people who own automobiles and want to bring automobiles to Nantucket, cars are incredibly expensive. And so they think that if they allow automobiles, well, that will continue to attract wealthy tourists to fund the island resort economy that we're in. And it really becomes a huge legal debate and also moral debate. I think that the legality of it is unknown, it's uncharted. In a 1903 law, Massachusetts says that communities can ban automobiles on, quote, particular roads or ways. So in 1903, Nantucket decides that all roads and ways on Nantucket are particular roads or ways.
Oh, nice.
And just blanket banned roads on every street. So technically, cars are allowed on Nantucket, but you can't drive them on the street.
That's interesting. That's certainly one way of reading that law. Did they get away with that?
Sort of. So the governing body for automobiles at this time is called the Massachusetts Highway Commission, and you could file an appeal. And so that really slow speed limit reduction I mentioned earlier, that 8 miles per hour and 4 miles per hour,
sure,
that's appealed to the Highway Commission. But before there's even a ruling on that, Nantucket issues its blanket ban, just really taking it a step further. And the newspapers just erupt when this happens. Right, the Highway Commission doesn't have time to rule on it yet, and the newspapers just break out with this pro and anti-ban factions that break out.
Plenty of op-eds.
So many op-eds. The the newspapers read like a telenovela. It's like going after each other. You see the same names pop up, and they're like targeting each other. One person who goes by Nantucket Jr. says that not one driver in 10 pays attention to the laws or apparently cares anything for them. Now, side note, that actually ends up being Alexander Starbuck, who's this great Nantucket historian I've cited before. But then another guy writes back who goes by the name Yorick, who says, well, it's silly to ban everything completely just for a few people breaking the rules. But Nantucket Jr., you should hop in a car, give it a test ride. You're going to love it.
There's always going to be some folks who just don't want something happening in their backyard, right?
There was no doubt that it was going to change the way of life. It's just a question of would Nantucket accept that and everything that came with it, or try to hold on to the way that it has always been without cars.
And so is that decision also appealed then to the Highway Commission?
Ultimately, it is. And the Highway Commission does say that you cannot decide all roads and ways or particular
roads and ways. Yeah.
So the selectmen of Nantucket very cleverly decide, okay, sure, we'll pick particular roads and ways. Well, it just so happens that all those particular roads are the ones that go to the wharf, that go to the ferry, or all the road that goes from town to Sconset. So
all the important roads.
Correct. All the important ones. And if you want to get a car here, you have to take it on a road you can't drive on. And if you want to use it to get somewhere else, Sconset, you can't take it on that road either.
That's one way of doing things, I guess.
If there's one thing you can say about Nantucketers, they will always find a loophole.
I can't imagine that everybody just went along with this ban. Were there any instances where folks tried to challenge the new ban, challenge the way that the majority of the island thought they should be driving their automobile?
The first real example of that is a man named Frank Tyler. Now, Frank Tyler was a character, as many people are in this history. But Frank Tyler was really this, almost like a car magnate. Like, he really was passionate about advancing cars and the technology of cars forward, and would sponsor races and other events like this. He was based on the mainland, but when he heard about the automobile ban on Nantucket, he really wanted to challenge the legality of it. And so he comes with this very verbose language. He compares himself to Christopher Columbus when he brings his Maxwell touring car to this island. He says to a newspaper, Christopher Columbus took a chance. If he had not, America might have remained undiscovered for another 100 years, and American civilization would have been that much behind. I took a chance last month and landed a Maxwell touring car in Nantucket.
And how did that play out for him?
Well, he got fined $25 when he arrived. But he knew that was going to happen, right? That's part of the point. He hired a lawyer who was very pro-car also, named William Thibodeau. And when they arrived, got fined, they actually took a photo together under a sign that says automobiles excluded. Right? They knew what they were doing. They knew they were going to be fined. He wanted to create this test case. So after he was fined, he went to court, was found guilty, but he appealed it to the Superior Court, which ruled that Nantucket did actually overstep its legal authority, and that it could not ban cars across the entire island. But of course, Nantucket is very thrifty, found other ways to institute the ban, and the ban would end up staying. In part because the next summer, in 1907, a petition went around the island that ended up accumulating 644 names. That's about 20% of the island residents at this point. It was apparently 11 feet long, and that petition was asking for the explicit right of the selectmen of Nantucket to directly ban automobiles. The competing petition to remove the ban, well, how many names do you think it got?
100?
52.
Oh.
52. So 8 times less. And these are, again, made on the same principles we talked about before. Cars can be dangerous. Cars startle horses. The smell of gasoline, this, new modern technology in this historic, quaint resort community. It's going to drive away the tourists who come here to go sort of quote unquote back in time. And ultimately that petition's received by Boston, and a bill is advanced that reads, quote, a protest with the Massachusetts Highway Commission shall not apply to the county of Nantucket from the 15th day of June to the 15th day of September in each calendar year.
Meaning that during the summer, they're allowed to have a car ban?
During the summer, no one can challenge the automobile ban.
Oh, interesting.
So they can have a ban all year, but in the off-season, people can appeal the speed limits and the ban on particular roads and streets to the Highway Commission. But in the summer, it's free reign. Selectmen are essentially czars.
So it seems that people on the island feel pretty strongly about this ban, and they've won some concessions to limit how much it's able to be challenged. Do you have any examples of how people felt about this?
Well, again, we go to the newspapers. And once again, the newspapers are filled with all these op-eds and opinions. Some people very strongly saying this is a huge win, that the Highway Commission cannot be challenged. It gives us the authority to assert the will of the people. Others are saying, you're keeping Nantucket back. You're not bringing it to the modern age. You're not bringing this new era of tourism. One of the best examples of this back and forth and controversy would be in 1912. There was discussion to get a mechanized fire engine, an automobile. Well, that town meeting was the most attended town meeting in the history of Nantucket up to that point to debate whether to bring an automobile fire engine to the island.
I'm guessing that they weren't fans of it.
Not at all. There's actually one guy who stands up in the meeting and says he flatly rejected it, saying that he would rather see his house burn down than see this automobile fire engine when he's driving his horses around Nantucket.
Given the history of the island with fires up till this point, I feel like that's a pretty strong statement. What's an example of somebody on the other side of things? I mean, is there anybody after 1912 trying to push this ban, trying to find a way around it or to advance the car agenda?
Big car agenda.
Exactly, big car.
I mean, the greatest individual of the auto ban story, it has to be Clinton Folger. Just the year after the auto chemical is discussed at town meeting, he ends up winning the government contract to deliver mail to Sconset, and he decides to buy an automobile to do so.
So he's a mailman.
So he's essentially a mailman, yeah. And you pick up your mail in town and you want to deliver it. You could take the train, but if you want to do it on your own schedule and have more flexibility once you get over there to go to different houses, you can do it by horse, or you get this new automobile. And so he ends up purchasing this huge but absolutely stunning car called an Overland. The photos are fantastic. It's just such a sexy car. And we have these great photos of him in it. So when he arrives at the pier for the first time with this new car, hundreds of people gather. Someone in the newspaper writes that it was because, quote, to see an automobile passing through the town was fully as interesting a sight as it would have been to see a man trundling a wheelbarrow full of turnips up Washington Street in Boston. That's how successful the automobile ban had been at this point.
I'm not sure I understand exactly why it would be interesting to watch a man trundling a wheelbarrow full of turnips up Washington Street in Boston, but I think I can appreciate the sentiment of the metaphor here.
These hundreds of people who gathered to welcome him to the island, or at least witness him coming to the island, some of them thought he might have been arrested immediately, but the police never showed up. No one was there to arrest him. Instead, he posed for pictures. We have photos in our collection of it arriving. And then he loaded up his mail and headed out to Sconset to do his job. Now, of course, this could not stand. This is an active violation of the auto ban. So the selectmen held a special town meeting in which about 600 residents, about a third of which were women, who I should note could not vote, actually, attended. And most of them were in favor of holding the ban and punishing Clinton Folger for it. He knew he was being antagonistic. So this is all kind of part of his plan.
Another rabble-rousing car driver.
A little civil disobedience, if you will.
Yeah, exactly. So what happens to Clinton?
Well, he is charged with violating the selectmen's orders.
Is he arrested?
He ultimately is fined $15.
Oh, interesting. So he actually gets away with a cheaper fine than
Frank Tyler with $25.
With the $25 a couple years earlier. Maybe they're softening a little bit.
Maybe, but then he ends up driving away from the courthouse after he is fined and is charged again with violating the selectmen's orders.
Well, he obviously was trying to get a rise out of them.
Oh, and he definitely did. I think one of the best photos in our entire collections of Clinton Folger, because another way he was trying to get a rise out of the selectmen is to get around the particular roads that are banned. He would hook up a horse. So he would drive to the end of the wharf, where he would drive where it was privately owned, get to the public portion, hook up a horse, the horse would pull him and his car over the public roads, and then when he got back to private roads, he would turn back on the car and continue driving. He called this running his car on horseline.
He's got it running like a chariot.
Basically. And then the big controversy was when it was really cold out, he would leave the engine on when he was going over the public road. So even though he was being pulled by a horse, the engine was still on. So is it an automobile if it's under horsepower? But it's still on, so it could operate as an automobile.
I think clearly from our definition earlier, it is not an automobile if it's under horsepower.
Exactly, but what if the engine's still on?
I don't know.
Is it in gear? That became a huge touch point when in the court case was it was on, but is it in gear? That's how they could determine if it was illegal or not.
Are there other ways that Clinton was trying to get around this ban?
One of the others, just a classic, almost cartoonish approach. The statute that said that the selectmen could ban automobiles also stated that there had to be signs specifying that automobiles were excluded.
I think I see where this is going.
Yep. And so when there was bad weather or some tomfoolery happening and the signs were taken down, blown down, fell off, well, if there's no sign, technically the statute can't be enforced.
Technically, there's no car ban.
So he would look for all these roads that were technically against the ban to drive on, but there was no sign. You can imagine the selectmen were less than thrilled with him. But again, if you're following the rule of law, he was finding all these loopholes and really pushing the limits of the ban. And in doing so, really forced the selectmen to define where their power ended and where automobiles could go.
And is he changing people's minds as well on island at this time? Is his antics just kind of annoying, or is he making a point?
I think he's doing both. I think he is making a point. I think they're all intentionally annoying. And he was trying to get a rouse out of people. In fact, he himself actually was pro-car ban in the summer. Just the year before he became the mailman, he actually signed a petition affirming the auto ban in 1912. So he wasn't completely for everyone just driving all over the place without speed limits, but he did think the year-round auto ban was a bit absurd. And he was slowly getting people bit by bit to see his legal case. But the auto ban story is really a legal story at its core, and his test case forced the town to define their power in a way that made it more explicit, but also much harder to enforce. But it still was holding. By 1915, Nantucket was the last remaining car-free community in New England.
When does this ban actually end?
The ban eventually falls in 1918. This isn't really due to Clinton Folger. It actually has to do with the context of the island. That railroad you mentioned at the beginning, now that was the lifeblood of Sconset. The railroad really opened up the island to different communities to be developed. Surfside, Sconset, Tom Nevers. But by 1918, the railroad was consistently losing money. It was loved by the community, but not profitable. And so the New York investors eventually pulled out. And as World War I was in full swing, the price of scrap metal was incredibly high. And so the investors decided to rip up the railroad and scrap it. Well, this left Sconset with a major crisis.
They were no longer connected in any way to the town.
Exactly.
Yeah.
In some ways, they'd been thrown back several decades, back to the 1860s or 70s. Right? They didn't have the railroad anymore. They didn't have cars. This period of exciting new types of transportation seemed to be disappearing before their very eyes. And people in Quidnet, Tom Nevers, Pulpus, Sconset, they were rightfully nervous about how they would continue to have access to town for their food, their mail, their fuel. And so riding on that wave, in 1918, a bill was signed by the Massachusetts governor that read, "Prohibiting the operation of motor vehicles in the town of Nantucket is hereby repealed." And it was sent to Nantucket for approval. And then on May 15th, 1918, by a margin of just 40 votes, Nantucketers decided to lift the ban prohibiting the use of automobiles on the island. Right? And these votes in favor of repealing the ban were really those who were worried that without the car, the extremities of the island would really be cut off.
The other thing I find interesting is that this is also a story of cars coming back to the island because public transportation is lost. When the railroad goes, that's like obviously a huge hit for these folks out in Wisconsin. I think that's sort of a common theme. I know that other places in the country were also turning to automobiles because they were losing their railroads or their streetcars or their, whatever else they had before.
Yeah, well put. I mean, you see this trend across the United States where we sacrifice public transport for personal transport. On Nantucket, we mirrored that and still do. People get incredibly frustrated driving in the summer, but a large part of it is that most people rely on personal vehicles. And that's a pattern we see literally within days of the ban being lifted. Within a week and a half, there were 24 vehicles on the island.
I guess it's a sort of one of those things where, once it's gone, you're not going to sit there with your head in the sand. You got to get with the times.
And they did. Nantucket today is developed in a very car-centric way. The communities that we have across the island are developed in the second half of the 20th century really with cars in mind. And the reason that the island can be as spread out as it is because there is infrastructure to drive around.
I think this is a really interesting topic. Like we've been discussing, I think there's a lot of opinions right now, especially in the summer, about how many cars is too many cars. I think this is really never completely gone away, even after the car ban was repealed. Obviously you've had movements like 20 is plenty in Wisconsin.
Mm-hmm.
So there's certainly something about whether it's keeping the island quiet and pristine or keeping the island accessible, even because you're worried about too much traffic. This is a story that very much, still plays into conversations that are happening right now.
Stick around. Right after these messages, we'll be joined by Brian Quigley, a law librarian at Boston College. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the Nantucket Gam. I am joined now by Brian Quigley, who's a law librarian at Boston College and has really dove into the history of Nantucket's car ban. So what first drew you to the car ban as a topic of research?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here. So I live on the Brookline-Boston border, and what I really love about my neighborhood is that it's very walkable, it's very bikeable, it's well served by mass transit, and I love not having a car. And, it's really nice. And as I was kind of wandering my neighborhood one day, I was thinking about how much the built environment has changed, right? So much of the walkability of this neighborhood comes from the fact that it was, built and developed before the car was really popularized. And once the car arrives on the scene, you see just a change in the way our streets are constructed and laid out. You see a change in how buildings are built, parking requirements and parking garages. Society itself has very much been transformed by the car. It got me thinking if there were any places where the coming of the car had faced some resistance. And I started doing a little research, and pretty quickly it seemed that there was, one island in Michigan and a few other small locations where the arrival of the car had faced some kind of headwind. And one of them was Nantucket. And this was really appealing to me. My grandparents had a place on Nantucket, and I came over once as a child. So I had some hazy, positive memories of the island from that. And what's great about Nantucket is that the Historical Association is so good, and they Inquirer and Mirror, one of the island's papers, has been digitized. And so it made doing this research very easy. And this project originally was going to be something relatively compact. And as I started reading, as I started learning about the characters, it just grew and grew.
I think one of the things, especially as a law librarian, that I want to investigate with you is this idea of how the ban was even possible. I think that even the question of automobiles was really at the legal frontier. Right? There was not a lot of legal definition of how to use or ban automobiles, and it felt like they were looping together loophole after loophole to institute the ban. So Can you explain a little bit about how municipal rights come into conversation with state laws in conditions like this or situations like this?
I think one of the things that attracted me to this story so much was exactly this question of who decides. In America, it's important to note that localities, municipalities, cities really only have the powers that state governments give them. And so there's constantly issues of trying to decide, what powers exactly have been delegated to localities, what are localities allowed to do, what aren't they allowed to do, what are the parameters in which they're allowed to function. And I think this gets even more complicated, at a time where the car is so new, there's relatively few state laws. The state eventually puts in a 15-mile-an-hour speed limit statewide.
Which seems crazy now because 15 miles per hour is so slow. Even in school zones, it's 25.
Well, what's interesting is that there was actually one of the characters here, Frank Tyler. He was fined for speeding, and he brought a legal challenge to that fine all the way to the state Supreme Judicial Court because he felt like any regulation on car speed was totally, a violation of his rights. The question of who decides, right? Because you have Nantucket, where in these early years, the car ban or restricting cars is broadly quite popular. Massachusetts had a statewide 15-mile-an-hour speed limit. And the law allowed localities to either lower the speed limit or ban cars from certain roads altogether. But if they did so, those regulations could be appealed to this highway commission, this state commission, who had to decide whether or not they were allowed. And what's interesting about this highway commission is that it's appointed by the governor, and its members were predominantly civil engineers involved in highway construction. So these were guys who knew a lot about cars, knew a lot about making cars efficient, letting them go fast, building the earliest solid roads that cars could really thrive on, but were maybe a little less attentive to local needs, especially in a place as unique as Nantucket.
Well, speaking of highways, one of the points of research that I will admit kind of made my head spin was the conversation around Milestone here on Nantucket. Because my understanding is that Milestone was actually built with state funds. Can you explain how receiving state funds came into conflict with the desire of the Autobahn?
So, one of the issues was that the state road from Nantucket to Sconset was built with state funds and, built in a way that was conducive to automobile traffic. And at one point, you have all these iterations of the early ban, right? Where first the town council dramatically lowers speed limits. I believe it's at one point it's 4 miles an hour in town and 8 miles an hour outside of town. Later on, they look at the law and they say, okay, well, we can ban cars on certain roads. So why don't we just ban them on all of the roads leading from the ferry, right? As a kind of, very clever way of functionally banning them everywhere. But by banning them on all of the roads leading from the ferry, you're also banning them from this state road. And so there are moments where when the Nantucketers go to the State House, one of the biggest arguments against the ban is, well, people from all across the Commonwealth paid for this road. We should all have the right to use it. And the town preventing us from doing so is kind of illegitimate or a violation of our rights or something like that. I think the legal question is a little nuanced, but I think as a rhetorical matter, I think it was a really useful for people who did support the car on the island. I think rhetorically it was a very useful thing to be able to point to.
I mean, from my understanding, they weren't actually banning automobiles outright or cars outright. What they were banning was actually the use of automobiles on roads. I think it was just an example for me of how specifically they were navigating the legal authority that was given and how it was actually applied, and just daisy chaining these loopholes together to enact what was a pretty popular shared notion by the people of Nantucket.
So I think there's kind of two interesting moments here where you have the town looking at the law and doing everything it possibly can to ban cars, right? And then a few years later, you've got Clinton Folger, who's also looking at the law and doing everything possible to evade it, right? There's these moments where, he has this legal theory that the state road is not a part of the ban and he should be allowed to drive his car on it. And so he begins by, having horses drag his car through the streets of the town until he got to the state road. He'd unhitch his team, fire up the motor, drive across the Sconset. And then, as time goes on, he gets increasingly creative, where he'll fire up his car, he'll drive it to the end of the dock, load up with mail and passengers, drive back to the end of the dock, because the dock is private property, and then hitch the team and pull himself through the town, engine running. everyone involved is kind of looking at the law. It's a very interesting moment because everyone is trying to use the law to their advantage, and everyone is being very granular and trying to maximize the amount of power they have, the amount of leverage they have, while technically remaining within the law they have, within the power they have. So,
Well, you mentioned that you started this project by thinking about other communities and how they reacted to the introduction of automobiles. Do you see other places have a similar resistance in a similar way where you also are testing the legal limits?
so in Bar Harbor in Maine, there was a similar ban and similar debate, but it didn't last as long, and it didn't never seemed to be quite as heated, and it never seemed to be quite as legally complicated as it was on Nantucket. I mean, Nantucket's ban lasted longer, and I think that it was just more. There was a lot more of this sense of pushing things to the legal limit. I think it's very interesting because everyone on every side claims to be protecting the specialness of Nantucket. You
Mm.
see this a lot during the final conversation in 1918. Clinton Folger, he had been doing all of his various provocations in 1913. In 1914, the Nantucketers go to the State House and they pass a law. The state government passes a law that says Nantucket can ban automobiles. They just need to have an island-wide vote first. They have the island-wide vote. The ban passes. Automobiles, have now been like definitively banned. No more loopholes. It's very, very straightforward. There's actually a really interesting moment in 1917 where there's a bunch of bored sailors, and you can only imagine how boring Nantucket must have been in like November of 1918. You're a young sailor, you're out here, you're looking for U-boats, and the sailors, they find Clinton Folger's car in its barn, and they start it up and they zip around the island honking at people and generally being a nuisance. And I believe they got like a $25 fine or something. And it's very funny because Alexander Starbuck, he writes into the paper and he says that he's going to contact the Secretary of the Navy over this, which is like a very, very funny overreaction. But I think that the uniqueness of Nantucket, it really comes up in that final vote in 1917. The railway had served as like the main conduit between town and Sconset for so long. It had never been profitable. It faced a lot of challenges over the years, and it was finally getting torn up for scrap. And you have a group of investors who are trying to develop Tom Nevers, and they bring a bill in front of the Massachusetts legislature that would end the auto ban because they felt without the railroad, getting to Wisconsin and back was just so much more of a challenge. And so in the run up to this vote, everyone is claiming to like protect the specialness of Nantucket. You have people who oppose the automobile who say, this is such a precious place. It's a place where I get to go and be away from the hustle and bustle of the city, take a little horse-drawn carriage ride. I get to ride my bicycle. I don't have to worry, and then you have people who want the automobile saying, this is a barrier to economic development. This island is so special. It should be shared with everyone. Imagine how much development we could do if people were able to motor around more easily. Yes, Nantucket's specialness and its preciousness is like such an important part of the debate. And so many of the letters that get written into the Inquirer and Mirror are on this topic.
Did the auto ban push forward any statewide laws or regulations around cars that you see as the foundational to development of cars across the state?
My short answer is no.
Okay.
I mean, I think that the auto ban, it seems to have been more or less forgotten for a long time. In 1941, Edward Stackpole, who's kind of a local historian, started looking into it a little bit. He actually ended up writing an article for the paper on it. And I know this because when I was at the Historical Association, I pulled some of his files, and there was all this really interesting correspondence in there where he actually corresponded with some of the people involved in the original debates. And I actually found a ballot from the original vote. It was the 1914 vote or the 1918 vote. I think otherwise, other than like being an article of local interest, so the car ban is, for better or for worse, not something that's had a huge impact outside of the island.
Now, when I think of driving, especially in the early 20th century and even voting up until 1918, this is a predominantly male sphere. Do you see a lot of the opinions of women as well at this time?
It's very interesting. So women could not vote, but they were really passionately concerned with the automobile question. And women, speaking broadly, although there were exceptions, broadly opposed the automobile. And a lot of them wrote about how, especially mothers with young children, felt like they could come to Nantucket and their kids could run around. They didn't have to worry about them, getting hit by a car, which was, part of the broader picture. If we zoom out a bit, is that when you look at like the streets in the pre-car era, so many children were like playing in the streets constantly. And if you look at like the video footage that does exist of, a typical American street or a typical street in Boston in 1904, it's just packed full of people. And it's not just people trying to get somewhere. It's also people selling things, kids playing in the middle of the street, just a very different landscape. And so a lot of women, love the fact that they come to Nantucket, their kids could run around and they didn't really have to worry as much. There's an interesting anecdote that I wasn't quite able to verify that I found in someone's papers about in one of these votes, one of the earlier iterations, it was kind of done by hand. People were raising their hands to, whether or not the Nantucket should pursue this at the State House. And a group of women sat near the back and all raised their hands in hopes that whoever was counting wouldn't notice, so they weren't technically voters.
That's a clever way to assert political agency.
I mean, it's one way. I mean, and I think that it's a key part of this final vote. And something I was thinking about a lot is that, so you've kind of got two things that happen. One is, the demise of the railroad. And this was happening all over Massachusetts. There were these local short railroad companies that were going out of business or losing certain lines as the car got more popular and lower cost. And the state actually did a big study and stepped in to save a lot of them in like 1919, 1920, that era. And so you could imagine if the railroad had just held on slightly longer, it might have had a longer lease of life after that. And the issue of, women voting, this is something that I think if women were enfranchised, the final vote to let cars in was so close that you could definitely imagine the vote going the other way.
That's so interesting. Just imagining just a few years difference actually could have elongated the car ban. Anybody on the island, I think, has frustrations with cars at one point or another. Whether it's, driving through traffic on Old South or trying to find parking in the summer, it does lead to a lot of frustration. And I'm curious if you see any continued legacies of the mentality or the logic behind the auto ban.
I do. It seems like, from 1919 onward, every 10 years or so, there's a big debate on the island about cars. People feel like there's too many of them, the traffic is too crazy. And there's all kinds of, attempts to change parking, attempts to change how much it costs to bring one over. But it really just feels like every 10 years, there's a big conversation about, why are there so many cars? What can we do to limit them? And I think that's what's interesting is occasionally someone will even reference the original auto ban positively, which I always find as a historian, it's always fun to see like those little offhand references like, okay, people still did remember this to some degree.
And is this mostly a 21st century conversation, or is this throughout the 20th century?
Oh, it goes way back. I did a little bit of research and I found in the 60s, the Inquirer and Mirror did a brief poll, and everyone they talked to said that there were like just way too many cars in town in the summer. It was just too hectic. But no one had a particularly convincing solution. But I think things have changed a lot in recent decades. In 1992, I found this little brief blurb. The Inquirer and Mirror asked Holly Cluett, who was a music teacher, what laws she thinks need to be changed on the island. And she said, I want to limit the number of cars that come over in the summertime. There are too many cars, period. But especially the big ones. It's that one man, one Range Rover mentality. And I think today, if you walk around town, I mean, the proliferation of gigantic, four-wheel drive SUVs, I think it feels a lot different than it would have felt 50 or, 100 years ago. The cars of 1926 were not quite as, giant and imposing.
There's so many of those out here, and some of these narrow roads that were designed as, cart paths that are technically two-way roads. That wide-body Bronco takes up both lanes.
I think one thing that has changed is the rise of the wave and transit on the island, right? It kind of begins in the 90s, as kind of a seasonal summer service. And it seems like in the last 10 years or so, it's become a year-round service. So I think the fact that you have, for the first time since the demise of the railroad, a sort of mass transit on the island, I think that does change the conversation.
In this desire to limit the amount of viewers coming to the island, does Nantucket even have the legal authority to do that? Kind of circling back to what we were saying at the beginning of our conversation, has the municipal body been given the agency to even enforce something like that?
That is a great question, and one that I should definitely, if anyone from the town is listening, I'd be happy to take a look and let you know.
I hope someone is listening. It'd be interesting. I mean, even in my time here, the question about cars is, constant in the summer. The frustration about cars is constant in the summer. I feel like everyone has an opinion. Well, thank you for chatting with me. I think that especially as we're in the midst of summer, cars and automobiles are constantly on everyone's mind in dealing with the traffic and parking. So it's really interesting to imagine a history of the island in which automobiles were not engaged with in the same way, and how there's actually an active resistance to their introduction to this island, but now they're so integral. So I appreciate you talking through some of the legal history and some of the cultural history around it, and it's a pleasure chatting with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
For more information, head to nha.org or check us out on social media. This episode was developed and created by Thomas Parrish, Adam DeLogue, and Phoebe Botticelli-Pole. Special thanks to our Chief Curator, Michael R. Harrison, and our Director of Collections and Research Services, Amelia Holmes. Our theme music was composed and performed by Isaiah Williams. Other music in this episode is by Blue Dot Sessions. The Nantucket Gam is a production of the Nantucket Historical Association. This episode is supported by NHA members and listeners like you. Thank you.